And then what about the elements of a good story that kind of help provide a framework for your message that's an effective, kind of familiar frame for most people to understand? Anybody remember that part?
Hero and a villain.
And one more. You had a hero, villain, one more component.
Action.
And victim is what I was looking for. So thinking about a story like Once Upon a Time, there was this, and that, and somebody's usually the victim or something is at risk. And then there's something that is the villain or some problem or threat that is putting that risk out there. And then there's the hero, right? And the resolution or the solution. None of these have to be actual, literal people. They can be, resources, they can be policies, they can be various things. So good, you got 2 of those C words. The rest were, what do we have? Clear, concise, compelling, credible, consistent, constant. Excellent. Here's another pop quiz. If I'm talking to a reporter and I have some information to share, but I say it needs to be on background, does anybody remember what that means, to go on background?
It would mean that the information is available for use in the story, but it wouldn't be directly attributed to you or your name.
Excellent. Bingo. How about off the record? It kind of means what it says, but why is it maybe not the best way to go when you're talking to the media? Is there any reason you might want to be careful when you're doing that, or why it's not a great idea? That's all right. I'll start by saying it's not really usually what reporters want. So if you think about it, why reporters are even calling you in the first place, they want you in the story. They want everything you say to be possibly usable in their story. They're looking for usable material, and anything you say off the record is really possibly marginal value to them. So it's helpful to them if you can go ahead and be on the record. And the other risk factor is that it can be a little bit dicey, where they might not remember when you said you were on the record or off the record, and you might end up saying something you thought was off the record and it's in the story. So it's got a little bit of risk attached to it. And here's just that reminder of what those terms mean. Okay, we talked a lot about messaging and how to stay on it, when so many times when you're doing an interview, it seems like the reporter is taking you off of what you really want them to report on or what you really came there to say. So we talked about tools for helping you transition that conversation back to what you want to say, using a bridge, a hook, a flag, some kind of cue to transition the reporter back to what you wanted to say. Does anyone remember like a phrase that they might use in an interview to get the conversation turned back to your own message? No, that's okay. Little cues like this. And, I can provide more of these, but sometimes this is helpful to even just have on a piece of paper, hang it up when you're doing your interview, just to kind of cue yourself while you're talking to the reporter, like, they're getting off point here. I want to bring them back. This is what I really want to make sure that they hear from me. And I'm going to use one of these cues to get the reporter back to what I wanted to say. How about this one? What's the difference between an editorial and an op-ed? One difference. Okay. An editorial is really, it's an unsigned piece. It's usually on the last page of the main section of the newspaper, and it's written by the staff of the newspaper. And they don't usually put a name on it. It's just a unnamed opinion of the newspaper's editorial board, which is a group. And they usually weigh in on policy issues, events in the news, and it's kind of voicing the opinion of the paper. Opposite that page, right on the very other page, is usually several columns that are submitted by guests, people in the community. Maybe they're a national elected leader, maybe it could be anybody really, but those are signed by the person who wrote them. And you can absolutely submit an op-ed under your own name. And that's one of the reasons I put it up here. Why is an op-ed a great way to get your message across, is because it's not just your one sentence quote in a newspaper article or your 20-second soundbite on the TV news, which is so quickly here and gone. It's usually 600 or 800 words, all yours, saying everything the way that you want people to hear it. So it's really a great way to control your story and your message. And it's free. You know, you write it, you send it in, they publish it, and all that took was your time to write it. So it's great. I even though we don't have a lot of daily newspapers surviving now, there's some online options and other ways to get guest columns published. Okay, so what do reporters really want? How can we tap into that? We talked a little bit about news hooks last week, where they really want something new. Maybe there's a story that's ongoing, like COVID is. What can they do to further that and not just keep regurgitating the same story, but find a new hook to that? Something surprising. Do you have information about something that has not been well understood before, or nobody's ever heard about before? Relatable. Again, news isn't the reason it's different than, say, a blog post or a journal or a telephone conversation with one person. The news value is that the story applies not just to a small segment of the population. It usually means that it's going to relate to a lot of people. You know, how do we make our story relevant to that? How do we show that it impacts a lot of people? Why everyone should care about this? Also, something that moves people, you know, letting your passion show when you tell these stories. I know that you guys are professional, and that's absolutely good to remain professional and objective and credible and full of facts, but it's okay to let your personal passion for the issues here at stake show a little bit. It's okay to say, you know, it breaks my heart when I see this happening or when I saw that happening. That kind of helps to make that emotional connection with readers. Great visuals always make a great story, I guess, unless you're on the radio, but it's good to think visually because that really helps to catch the media's interest. Again, here are some of those news hooks. Has anyone been experimenting with this, thinking about how you might use one of these news hooks to pitch a story to a local reporter? Do any of these sound familiar for an interview you've done in the last couple of weeks? A calendar hook might have been this past weekend. We had Father's Day. You know, there might have been some kind of feature story that we could have pitched around Father's Day and our residents and families. Again, and last week we talked about it's going to be really important for us to get comfortable being proactive. We're not always going to get as many calls from the media as maybe we have been over the last few months. So getting comfortable with doing some research, looking at who is writing about these stories, which TV reporter seems to be reporting on these issues that we work on. Look them up, read their stories, get familiar with it. Be able to reference that when you make your calls to that reporter and say, hey, I saw this, or I know you've covered this, but here might be a new angle that you might be interested in. When they're calling you, don't be afraid to ask, you know, what is this about? I need more information about what you're reporting on to make sure I'm the right person to talk to. You know, getting ready to do that interview, jotting down your notes. What do you really want to say? What do you make sure you do not want to say? Feel free to ask for help before you do an interview. You know, I'm available, and I know that Katie, you guys are available. If anybody ever wants to call and work something out before they do an interview. Helping reporters, again, it's a symbiotic relationship. They can help us get our stories out there, and we can help them. And think of your job as being a teacher, helping them understand the issues that are at stake. during the interview, trying to stay positive, trying not to get negative, certainly try not to get into a fight with a reporter. We talked about that. You don't get in a fight with people who buy ink by the barrel. Be comfortable with silence if you don't have something to say. You've said your answer and you really have nothing else to add to it. When you babble on, and that's what a lot of us tend to do when we maybe get a little nervous, that's when we might get into trouble. So it's good to just go, that's what I came to say. I'm going to be quiet now. I'm going to be silent, and the reporter's going to have to move on, right, to another question. Again, always okay to say, I don't know the answer to that, or I can find someone who might be a better person to talk to. But what do we not want to say when we're asked a question by a reporter? Anybody remember that one? It's not written down here. You never want to say no comment. You can just picture that person, right? Saying no comment, kind of getting into their car and racing away from the reporter on 60 Minutes or something. It's just, it makes you seem like you're hiding something, or there's, you know, you're guilty of something. So that's a good one to stay away from. You know, this came up, I think someone asked last week or the week before that, is it all right for me to ask the reporter to show me the story before they publish it? And I wanted to clarify that that actually isn't, they're not obligated, and they probably ethically don't want to show people the story that they've written before it's published. It's almost like getting permission, like, can I state this, as if we have the power to scratch out a bunch of their story. It's ethically on you know, thin ice. But it is okay to say, can you show me or repeat back to me the quote you're going to use? I want to make sure that that you got it right and that I got it right. That's okay to do. Anything that you said, feel free to ask them to say it back to you or for you to review it. How do we make ourselves quotable? You know, it can be frustrating to spend a lot of time doing interviews and then not see yourself show up in the news. And, you know, that's okay. We just talked, I don't know if everybody was on the call, we mentioned there was a giant story in the New York Times this weekend about, what are they called? This, when a resident is, what's the word, Katie, I'm looking for?
Involuntary discharges.
Involuntary discharges. Well, that reporter talked to probably a bunch of you. She said I think she called almost all the state programs, and mostly it was about California and New York. So she had dozens of conversations. Many of you spent time and effort getting her information and doing these interviews. And then when we see we're not in the story, it can be a little disappointing. Just know that it was still worthwhile. It's a relationship building thing, and you were a good resource to do that. But thinking about how you make your quote memorable, is it something that brings up a picture? Is it something you'd want to tell a friend? Is it something that everybody can understand? It's not full of jargon. It's not technical. It's just, it brings up a feeling, or an image is a good way to get yourself quoted. And then I'd sort of try to combine, what are most reporters looking for? Your successful interview is going to usually have these 5 pieces, and you know, feel free to jump in and talk about your experiences. I think lately a lot of folks have been doing interviews, and this is how it usually goes. If you can touch on these 5 points, you've done a good job doing that interview. You start out with here's who I am, this is what we do, this is our role and why we do it. And you use every interview as a chance to educate your target audience and the public and the policymakers about the Ombudsman program. What's the story? Again, going back to that frame of villain, victim, hero. If you can communicate what's going on right now, or in general, what your role is all about in this story frame, that's great. Have an anecdote ready, some kind of real world example of something that has happened recently that involves a real resident, a real family, a real facility, a real policy, and have that story ready to share. Data, reporters love numbers, and you've all been probably dealing a lot with trying to dig those numbers up for reporters, and it can be real challenging, but it helps to tell the story. Being a good resource, like we just talked about with that reporter, even though we weren't quoted in the story, we were a good resource. We're somebody that maybe is going to go into their contacts and be called again. We are a connector. We can connect the reporter with others who can be useful to them. So those are really good ingredients to keep in mind. I think that's all I have for slides today, but I just wanted to, again, connect and mention that I'm available if anybody wants to bounce ideas around, get ready to do an interview. We can do some preparation together. If you want help writing anything for the media, a press release, an op-ed, a letter to the editor, or even pitching a story, let's work together to find the right reporter to call and get them on the line and try to successfully pitch that story. I'm here. So that's, again, my contact information. I think that is it. I'll stop sharing the screen. And now we can just open it up again to questions. What's been going on? Anybody have anything on their mind I can help answer today?
So, hi, Kristen. It's Carol Scott from the Resource Center.
Yeah.
You know, many of these folks have local programs that they're responsible for, and sometimes the local folks will have been contacted by the media. And this may actually be more of a conversation within the state ombudsman than to you, but you know, sometimes there's concern about what that local program has said. Do you have any tips, or do any of the other people have tips on, you know, I mean, we don't want to muzzle, because we want local people to be talking to their local media about the program, but I mean, you kind of get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, first of all, going way back to the beginning about strategic communications, that your programs can use that to be consistent. We should all have basically the same message about most of what we do, right, in our program. Should really be all on the same page. You know, this is how we talk about our program, from how are we funded? What's our relationship with this agency, or, you know, with the administrators? What do we do? You should all have the same language around that. And you can do that by bringing people together and sharing fact sheets and doing these kinds of conference calls. I'm not sure if all the states have the same kind of process. I know in Washington State, they've set it up where if a local or regional ombudsman gets a phone call from the media, their protocol is to refer it to the state ombudsman, who then will, you know, work backwards to connect and make sure that the locals are ready to do that interview and are the right person in the first place to do it. So yeah, definitely not muzzling. And I think one thing we were thinking of suggesting, and I don't know if you guys would vote for this, is bringing a lot of your regional staff into this loop, you know, getting everybody feeling comfortable and successful doing interviews, so that, again, you can share the burden and the reporters can get to talk to people who are sometimes always closer, right, to certain situations in certain counties and geographies. They're the best person to speak to. I know, again, just for this New York Times story, we had the ombudsman from Eastern Washington on the phone, and he had firsthand experience with a couple of involuntary discharges, and he was definitely the best person to talk about them. So yeah, I think it makes sense to bring those staff all into the loop here and get them trained up and feeling confident, and everybody sharing the same skills, and working to develop some consistent messaging tools. Does that help answer the question, Carol?
Yes, yes. I think the fact that you mentioned that Washington State has a protocol, I think that's a good tip for other states, is that there probably ought to be some kind of understanding with the local folks that's done in a way like you suggested, with some education and training, and why it's important that, especially if it's a policy issue, why it's the state ombudsman who is thinking this over with the local person when they answer the question.
Right. And it helps us build community. I mean, what are we all working? What are we hearing from? Why? So this one reporter in maybe a small town in Texas gets this, or your local regional person gets a call. We all want to know what's happening. You know, why are the media reporting on these, and get everybody in the loop, because it may well be, you know, it's going to go to the next county and the next county and the next town. And it's good to just be on the same page.
Okay, thank you so much.
Any other questions before we wrap up today? And we'll do that survey and think about other ways that we can provide useful resources to you. All right. Katie, anything else?
I don't think so. I think that's all for today.
Well, it's been really great spending time with you. And again, thank you for everything you're doing. And please holler if there's any way I can support you.
Thanks, Kristen. Appreciate the help.
Absolutely. Patricia Hall just
Thank
typed
you.
in, thanks for the information. It makes the media less scary.
They can be pretty scary. It can be dicey. So
Well,
always
we're gonna,
Virginia agrees.
okay, thanks, Suzanne. We're gonna miss these Media Mondays. This has been a very good series, and on behalf of Amity, I want to thank Katie for setting them up, and Kristen, you are, and we thank you.
Thank you so much. Really, anytime, and we can definitely do them more. And there's so much more material to cover. We didn't even begin to cover how you can use social media. You know, there's a lot more we can do. I think, you know, thinking about it, not just in the terms of this crisis of COVID-19, but ongoing. Can we use it to recruit volunteers? Can we use it to do fundraising? Can we use it to get more respect in our state capitals when we, you know, need to work with the agency staff? And the answer is yes. So there's a lot more we can do.
Great, thank you.
Guys. Well, you all stay safe. I'll talk to you soon, I hope.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.